you, everybody, for coming to the Aaron Torres Podcast YouTube page. If you could do me a quick favor, see that little black subscribe button at the bottom of your screen? Go ahead, click that black subscribe button. Really does help our audience grow, really does help our channel grow, really does help and mean more than you could possibly know. So go ahead, hit that little black subscribe button. Also, thank you to our presenting sponsor, Betfred Sportsbook and the Betfred Sportsbook app. Bet 50 on any game, get $250 in free bets. Thank you again to Betfred. Thank you again to you. Now, here's the video that you came here for. Believe it or not, we are still talking college hoops roster news here in late June. It is officially summer. Like, summer on the calendar has hit, and we are still talking roster news as it pertains to college basketball. And it's wild because over the last couple weeks, like, one of the refrains that I've gotten is, Torres, you're talking too much about Kentucky basketball. And I said it a few days ago, but it's like, yeah, I'm talking about Kentucky because there's nothing else going on anywhere else. Everybody else's rosters are set. Everybody else is good to go. And Kentucky, it's just one big game of musical chairs since June 1st hit. Entering this month, they had just 7 scholarship players, as we've talked about many times, 5 freshmen, now very good freshmen, the number 1 recruiting class in the country, and 2 sophomores. I bring it up because just in the last couple weeks, here's what happened. They have added 2 commitments. Joey Hart, guard, originally committed to Central Florida, opened up his recruitment, was recruited by Indiana, Rutgers, etc. He chooses Kentucky. And then Jordan Burks, overtime elite kid. I think he's a very talented upside play for Kentucky. Talked to some people at Overtime Elite. They believe he has the potential to play in the NBA. So you add those 2. You're now at 9 scholarship players. It appears as though they're on the verge of adding another scholarship player in Samto Cyril, a reclassification candidate from Overtime Elite. But I bring it up because there was one big piece that everybody was kind of waiting on when it came to Kentucky, and that was the status of Antonio Reeves. For people who don't know the Kentucky roster really well, this kid he played last year on the team, to be clear. Was phenomenal down the stretch, was one of their best players as Kentucky, I thought, played pretty well February into March. And it was a weird spring for him. Enters the NBA draft, and then at the draft deadline decides to return to school, but didn't officially announce that he was coming back to Kentucky. And there were talks about, is he going to try to transfer? He's not a grad student, so he has to graduate first, so he's taking classes at his former school. What is going on? Well, I bring it all up to say that after the chaos of all spring long at Kentucky and the chaos with Antonio Reeves of the last 2 or 3 weeks, Kentucky got the best news that it possibly could on Wednesday when Antonio Reeves, it was reported by Travis Branham, had officially moved back to Kentucky, was no longer taking classes anywhere else, was no longer trying to be a graduate transfer. He is back at Kentucky, and this is the first really big, really good piece of news that Kentucky has had in a while. And listen, UK fans, I have criticized a lot of things over the course of the spring and summer, but credit for John Calipari getting this kid back on campus and for getting it done. And I don't think you can describe how big this is. There isn't a bigger move that Kentucky could have made this spring, frankly, than getting Antonio Reeves back. And they actually didn't even get him back in the spring. They get him back on the first day of summer. First of all, let me say this. Last couple weeks have been crazy, like I said. Removes his name from the NBA draft. The reports were that he went back to his former school, Illinois State, to try and graduate because he missed the transfer deadline for undergraduates in May. Only way he could go anywhere else was to graduate. And so it was this weird thing. Everyone's trying to figure out what's going on. He's at Illinois State. Is he going to graduate? You saw multiple media outlets reporting, oh, this school's reached out. That school's reached out. I'm not going to say names, but there were media outlets, media personalities that were, report. He's doing this, he's doing that. So I bring it up because it was kind of a weird spring, but ultimately all that matters is that he's back now. And as I said, you can't describe how big this is for Kentucky. First of all, just from a basketball standpoint, he's a really good player. I would argue he wasn't just one of the best players on Kentucky by the end of the season. I think you can argue he was one of the best guards in maybe all of college basketball over the final 3, 4, 5 weeks of the season. Finished the regular season 37 points against Arkansas at Bud Walton Arena. Kentucky goes in there and gets a win. They had 1 million guys banged up, 1 million guys with injuries, Oscar Sheboy's in foul trouble, whatever. Antonio Reeves to the rescue, 37 points. After that, 22 points in the SEC tournament against Vanderbilt. Kentucky struggled. He did not. 22 points against Providence in the second round or the first round of the NCAA tournament. Kentucky gets that victory over Providence. So this wasn't just a one-off thing. This was a guy that averaged 14.5 points per game in the SEC last season, 39% three-point shooter. Now he is back. Now, you as Kentucky on June 21st, 2023, officially just added a 15-point per game scorer to your roster. Again, I know I've criticized this, that, the other thing, but there is no bigger piece that Kentucky could have gotten at this point. Really talented player, and I would also say this. I just think it's important to get a grown man back in that locker room. And that was a lot of talk of why is he seriously considering other schools? And the buzz was he's like a 22-year-old dude. He's been in college forever. He doesn't want to come play with a bunch of freshmen, but he is back. He is a veteran. He is experienced. He is fearless in SEC play. And let me just say this. Now that he's officially back, I think we can start talking about Kentucky again as a legitimate something. I think we were all waiting for the pieces and trying to be fair. And to be blunt, I'm going to be fair and I'm going to be transparent. I'm not going to pretend like the last 2 months didn't happen. I have been very critical of John Calipari in Kentucky because it's just, you needed a plan. I've said it a million times. I thought he moved too slow in the portal. I thought you could have added a couple vets early on and then you wouldn't be in scramble mode. But now that Antonio Reeves is back, it is worth noting this. He is returning to a very talented roster. Yes, I'd like a little bit more experience. Yes, I'd like a little bit more depth with guys that have played college basketball. But if you listen to this show, the one thing that I have been consistent on all spring long, I'm not as down on Kentucky as everybody else because of the fact that John Calipari historically has done his best with elite freshman talent. I've seen a bunch of people who do these way too early top 25s, guys and girls that I respect. They don't even have Kentucky ranked. They don't have them at 24, 25, unranked, whatever. And I said, listen, I get that it's an older sport, and I've been more critical than anybody. But let's also call a spade here. They have 3 potential lottery picks in their starting lineup. Calipari has always been best with freshmen. Now you're adding 14.5 points per game back to that starting lineup. More important than that, though, it's 14.5 points per game, and it's a guy who fits with the dudes they already have. DJ Wagner, I think, is going to be awesome at Kentucky. And it feels like there's a little reverse DJ Wagner, whatever you want to call it. Everybody loved him, was the consensus #1 player forever. And then the time goes on, and is he that good? And now I'm looking at 2024 mock drafts, and he's outside. He's a very good player. He's going to be that NBA level talent with the ball in his hands that Kentucky always has success with. I'm recording here the 21st, the eve of the draft. Kentucky season flipped last year when they put the ball in Cason Wallace's hands and they let him eat. Cason Wallace, by the way, projected outside the top 15. I think it's insane. I think he's one of the 10 best players in this draft, no doubt about it. So now you have the NBA level point guard. You have Justin Edwards, the 3-and-D guy, who I think can get buckets on that end of the floor. Rob Dillingham, 5-star guard. I don't know. No disrespect, but he's 5'10", 5'11". He's a little bit small. He's a little bit frail. I don't know if he can play 36 minutes a night in college basketball, but can he give you 18, 20 minutes off the bench and get you buckets? I think he can, and now the burden is off of him to be great every single night. In the front court, we've talked about it. Aaron Bradshaw, we'll see what happens. Recorded after the injury, it was 4 to 6 months, and then some people are saying it's 4 to 6 weeks, and Aaron Bradshaw seems to confirm it. So you certainly hope that's the case for Kentucky. And then, of course, you have the big center, Ugana Kingsley, on the roster as well, Ugana Nyenso Kingsley, and Adu Thiero, as well as those 2 freshmen that I mentioned who just committed, Reed Shepherd as well, Sampdo Ciro as well. And so that's why I think this is so important. Not just because you add a vet, not just because you add 14.5 points per game, but because you add a vet who does the things that you need. Could not be more excited. And let me finally say this. I know it's late June. I don't think it's too late to still find pieces late in the summer. Still would love to see them add another vet or 2. I think with scholarships, it would be no more than 2 because they're running out of scholarships now with the freshmen that they've brought in. but I would love to see them add a vet because feels like they're one vet away. I guess that's what I would say. And it's not as though you can't get a vet still. West Virginia, I still think there's another shoe to drop. I'll mention it again. I understand why West Virginia wants to find a permanent replacement for Bob Huggins. The longer this goes, the more time these kids that are currently on campus have time to sit there and say, maybe I should look at my other options. You have a situation where there are other guys available in the portal still. There's not a lot. There's not a ton. There's not a ton of difference makers. But can you get a vet that can come in, calm the locker room, play off the bench? Those guys are still out there if you search hard enough. So we will see what happens. Still think Kentucky's probably a vet away from me feeling really good about this team. But I'm telling you, man, I've been critical. But I've also said if you can just get a few vets around these freshmen, this team has a chance to be really good again. That's exactly what Kentucky has after Antonio Reeves returns to UK.